In the early 1800s, a handful of women wanted to go to university but were refused on gender grounds. Those that were refused gathered others and all met in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And we may trace the official beginning of the delusion we are under today to that meeting. There is another, a less heard about delusion. This delusion is that I and my young men friends were oppressed by not being able to join Girl Scouts in the 1970s. Certainly we were discriminated against. I knew, for example, that because I was a boy I could not join Girl Scouts. After talking to some girls, I might have said that some activities looked fun, but I would join Boy Scouts instead. I didn't want to join Girl Scouts. I was not oppressed. But the delusion is that no, I was oppressed and I am suffering today from denial of that oppression, and from me and my friends not being free to join Girl Scouts. Welcome to the delusion. In 1848, there was perhaps less than 1% of men who attended a handful of universities, and perhaps a few percent more who wanted to go, but the majority of men did not want to go or even consider going. The same level of desire was probably true of women, though the statistics on this question are limited. What can be known is that these handful of women who wanted to go were indeed discriminated against and could not enter the men-only universities. There were a number of solutions at the time. 1, form women-only universities, or 2, convince all women that they were discriminated against and thus oppressed because these few women were discriminated against, and then force all universities to open up to women. Both paths were taken, with Radcliffe College fully integrated into Harvard in 1977. But what most importantly happened was that for the first time an abstraction was used within an argument, and the conclusion of that argument was used to create a feeling, and that feeling was used to unite women, and that unity then proceeded to destroy the government's ability to control itself. And today governments in the West are bankrupt, the community is divided, the birth rate is below fertility for 2 generations, women are lost and unhappy in greater numbers than ever before, and men need to protect themselves against Western women. This is the structure of the delusion in all fields. A purposefully placed assumption in an argument is not of evidenced fact of reality, but is an abstraction. The purpose of the argument is not to derive information about the world, but is aimed at social manipulation to gain power, to gain control over men. This rhetorical device to whip up emotions, coming as it did in the age of modern science, in the age of reason, planted a seed of destruction within 50% of the population, so dangerous that reality has been replaced by an emotive, snowflake, and unsustainable ideology of unprovable victimhood. The objective was to unite all women, with support of some men, into a huge class of the oppressed, to gain a stronger voice in order to seize control over men-constructed institutions of higher learning, as opposed to uniting to build women-only institutions of higher learning that were better. One technique to support this emotive objective was a convolution of the destruction of an inductive argument. Every swan I have seen is white, therefore all swans are white. I found a black swan, therefore not all swans are white. Let's move this into the feminist camp. Every woman I ask says she is not discriminated against. Therefore, all women are not discriminated against. One woman is discriminated against. Therefore, not all women are not discriminated against. Cancel the double negative 2 nots and all women are discriminated against. This twisting of logic was perhaps supportive of the undemonstratable fact that most women in 1848 did not think they were discriminated against, had no evidence that they were discriminated against, would disagree that they were discriminated against, but all to no avail. The abstraction was repeated. Twisted logic given instead of evidence overrode people's very experiences. This is how the feminist delusion was created, and from this proven process, other delusions sprang up in other fields: economics, politics, scientism. To summarize the structure of the delusion as regards feminism, we can point to two approaches, one of delusion and one of experienced fact. In the delusion, you are told that you are discriminated against. But in experienced fact, you know that, and you tell other people, I am discriminated against, and you give evidence. In the delusion, you are told that you are oppressed. But in experienced fact, you tell someone, I am oppressed, and you give evidence. Under the delusion, you are told not to talk about evidence to the contrary. But in experienced facts, all humans have their own stories. Under the delusion, to deny your very oppression is mental sickness, and it is also evidence of oppression. But in experienced fact, to deny oppression is fine. In the delusion, to demand evidence of oppression through statistics is met with changing the definition of words or an appeal to abstraction. And to demand evidence of a lack of oppression is an impossible task. One can never prove a negative. In the early 1800s, a handful of women wanted to go to university but were refused on gender grounds. Those that were refused gathered others and all met in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And we may trace the official beginning of the delusion we are under today to that meeting. It is reasonable to ask, why did this insane feminist twisted logic not cause problems earlier? It was only when this logically fractured feminist ideology was able to misallocate enough resources that its unsustainability became clear. Women only got the vote in the 1920s, and there were two highly destructive wars, and so it wasn't until the wealth of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that governments became able to fund women in their feminist economy, fully promoting their misguided arguments and their silencing of reality. Today, the conflict of interest is so ingrained that any suggestion to stop this delusion is an attack not only on deeply held delusion, but on money in women's purses. Today, we are witnessing the collision of reality and multiple delusional ideologies. When women today judge that men are useless and treat them openly as such, when community resources are taxed and used to support those who do not work, when teetotaling women demand violence to keep men docile in the home and away from other men, of emotivism, of scientism, and when all men's biologic programming is branded as evil. This collision of deluded ideology with reality can have no other result than unsustainability of community decline and community death. Mgtow men defend themselves against delusion and decline by grounding themselves solidly in reality.